Hey, what's up guys? So I have a little announcement to make. I'm going to be taking a pause on my weekly vlogs just because I feel like they've kind of turned into me just trying to push out an update video for you guys. And originally with the vlog, I wanted it to be more of a day in the life and just showing how I work and just my overall approach to different aspects of freelance. However, since now that everything is slowed down during COVID, I'm going to be taking a pause on that and hopefully return in sometime in the future. However, I still will be uploading weekly videos every Sunday, just like you're used to, so keep an eye out for that. And in this week's video, I'm going to be talking about what I think is my top 5 investments that I made for doing freelance product photography. Now, I'm not going to go into the obvious of camera selection or buying a laptop, just because I feel like there are so many good options out there right now that it doesn't really matter as much which camera or lens that you're getting. I'll just briefly mention that for product photography, you're probably going to want a zoom lens for a variety of focal lengths, and you don't need anything super fast because most of the work you're going to be doing is going to be shooting in either a controlled lighting situation or something using natural light and on a tripod, so that would give you the flexibility of extending your shutter speed while having a deeper depth of field. And that's that way leads us into the first item I'm going to be talking about today, which is a tripod. And for those of you who haven't tried doing product photography before, a tripod is essentially a must because in terms of shot consistency and having to run back and forth between your staging and your camera, it just makes the process so much easier to have your camera mounted on a tripod, especially when you might have a bigger camera. You don't want to be lugging it back and forth between your stage and where you're shooting. And on top of that, if you aren't shooting with a tripod, every single shot you make, if you try to adjust the lights and you're moving your camera, then you're gonna have to readjust for the composition as well. And this just makes the whole workflow a lot more difficult and a lot trickier. Now, it's not as difficult if you have a second person to help you out with the staging and with setting things up. That will actually make life a lot easier, but I feel like if you're just starting out or if you're just practicing, then sometimes you might not be able to find an extra person, especially now with social distancing. Second item I'm going to be listing on this list is a light stand. A light stand is incredibly invaluable when setting up a product photography shoot because it is flexible in the fact that it can hold different lights as well as hanging things off of it or just taping or clipping a reflector onto the light stand. I would recommend getting at least one solid and reliable light stand because if you're going to be mounting a light on that, the worst thing that can happen during a shoot is if your light falls. This is mostly because if you're going to be sticking a softbox on it to get softer light, then that's just a bulky accessory on your light stand, which raises the center of balance, increasing the chances of it falling. Make sure you get a solid light stand, and a good idea to always weigh it down with some sandbag. If possible, it'll also be a really good idea to get a couple more light stands because in product photography, you never really know when you might need an extra one. For example, if you want to add a little accent light on the side and you want to put a light there but you don't have a light stand, and it makes moving it around and positioning it a little more difficult. Or if you want to hang a backdrop in the background, and you can have a couple light stands with a pole in between. Personally, I have 2 of these Manfrotto Art light stands. I'll show you just here. These are a little bit massive, a little bit overkill. However, they're very reliable and have a solid wide base. If you can't get one that's a little more sturdy, I also have a smaller, cheaper light stand if I want to clip like a reflector to it. But in looking for light stands, I would recommend looking at them secondhand on local classifieds, just because this Manfrotto Art light stand that I got for about $20 Canadian. And if you're just starting out, you might want to minimize your budget so that you can invest in other things such as lights or softboxes. And the next item I'm going to be talking about are some lights. So this is either going to be your continuous light, a speed light, which is normally an on camera, or you can have it off camera as a wireless, as well as bigger, more powerful strobe lights. Depending on how familiar you are with the camera, if you're just starting out, I wouldn't recommend you using speed lights for your product photography. I'd probably go with something like a continuous light, just because it gives you a live view of exactly how your photo is going to look. And since most product photography is still life, you can always just extend your shutter speed if your camera is on a tripod. That'll compensate really well for your exposure. However, I do want to mention that speed lights can do a couple things that continuous lights might not be able to, depending on how powerful the continuous light is. Since you probably want to be shooting with your base ISO, which is normally ISO 100, then for continuous lights, you're going to have to drop that shutter exposure so that your shutter is open for longer. And where this might be an issue is if there's any motion you want to put into your product photography. That has to do with pouring something or any motion you want to have in your frame. And if you're shooting with a continuous light, you'll generally have to go with the motion blur within your photo, which might be a desirable photograph. Or if you want something that freezes motion, then you're gonna have to get something a little bit more powerful, and that's when speed lights or strobes come into play. More expensive option would be to buy a strobe that has a built-in continuous light bulb. That means that you can have a continuous light source to preview exactly how the light is going to fall off your object while having the power output of a flash. These lights are generally more heavy and more expensive to buy into, so I'm not going to be recommending this to start out. However, if you do want to get some flexibility with your system, then maybe look into getting a cheaper speed light that you can control wirelessly. I personally have the Godox SL60W, which is a really nice, cheap, and affordable continuous video light. That's the one I'm actually using right now. And as my flash, I use the Godox 8200 Pro, which gives me some flexibility with the power output as well. Going into the fourth item on my list, I have a softbox or octabox, something that will help you harness the power of your light choice. One of the reasons I encourage getting good lights for product photography is because if you're shooting in perhaps an indoor or studio setting and you're relying on natural light, the issue with that is that a lot of times natural light will change throughout the day. Sometimes you'll have clouds coming over as overcast. Sometimes you'll get harsher light and you'll need more levels of diffusion. This makes the workflow for a product photographer more tricky because that means you constantly have to be watching your natural light source to see if it has been diffused more and you have to compensate with your exposure, or if it's more harsh and you have to compensate your exposure again. But having to compensate for natural light, if it's consistent for a good period of time to get your shots through, it's all right. But some days you never really know. So that means that you're going to be changing your settings. Normally it's going to be the shutter speed if you don't want to affect your depth of field or touch your base ISO. So having good lighting and having a large softbox or octabox for that matter will definitely allow you to have greater flexibility when shooting your stuff. I say this just because sometimes it takes a lot of time to set up a shoot and then you realize that the light has changed directions or it's at a different point in the sky, which means you might have to move your staging around. But when you're setting up product photography, sometimes you cannot move something after you set it up. So just something to keep in mind. And the very last item I have on my list is actually a couple of items, would be to invest in some makeup brushes and some air blowers. So I specifically say makeup brushes because most of the time if you're getting good quality makeup brushes, then you won't have any issues with the bristles falling out. They'll be nice and fine, which will make sure if you're trying to get any debris off of your product shoot, then you can do so with ease. I bought a makeup brush set, which helps me clear the area if I want to clear off any debris or dust. And this saves me a lot of time in post-production if I don't have to go into Photoshop and clear all of the dust specks off of a picture to make it look clean. If I just do that in real life and I can get a good set out of that staging, then it saves me a lot of time. An air blower really helps when you have glossy objects or surfaces that you can't really afford to touch, otherwise you would have to wipe down again. And the reason that I say to use brushes and air blowers and to not really touch it with your fingers is because you don't really want to be leaving smudge marks on your stage. As well, you don't want any of your finger oils to contaminate the area because your fingers will produce oils and that'll be apparent on some photos. I found that these little attention to detail really impresses your client and just shows how much you care for getting a great result for them. Those are my top 5. However, I have a couple notable additions that I thought would be worth mentioning. Number 1 being a USB cable extension that would allow your camera to tether to a computer. This is super handy because when doing product photography, if you're working with another person, this allows the other person to review and to check the photo. If they want to adjust something in the frame, then they can, and it's a lot easier to see how it looks from the view of the camera, because if you're going to be working with a stylist or someone that does staging, then they might not exactly know how it might look from the camera settings that you're using because they're not the photographer. So it's really important for them to be able to have a quick preview of what it looks like so they can make any minor adjustments quickly and efficiently. Another really useful thing might be to have a remote shutter trigger. This really helps if you're having to use longer exposures with your camera on the tripod. That way you're not pressing the button and you don't have to use the timer feature so that you don't make any extra camera shake. This is especially important if you're in low light situations and you just can't really afford that. So make sure you get a good light. And the last one would be to get a solid ball head or quick release plate for your camera, because this just makes leveling your shots really easy and quick and you don't have to do much checking. I know that some newer cameras have built-in levels for them, but generally I find that bubble levels are easier to look at and you don't have to go through the menu system to find where it's at. Anyways, that's all there is for this week's video. If you guys liked it, feel free to give me a thumbs up down below. For those of you who are new to my channel, I make process videos on my process of photography, as well I upload tutorials and reviews. If that's something you might be interested in, feel free to hit that subscribe button down below, and I will see you guys in next week's video. See you guys, stay safe and take care.